Your home may feel calm, but 5 small mistakes could be pushing money out every single day. A misplaced clock, a visible trash can, cluttered shoes, water in the wrong room, and broken things that break your luck. These are not decor issues. They're wealth leaks. Let's fix them. We walk past them every day. A clock, a trash can, a pair of shoes. They seem harmless, but in Feng Shui, nothing is neutral. Every object either holds your energy or scatters it. And when placed wrong, these familiar things quietly disturb your qi. Not all at once, but slowly, quietly, until your wealth just stops flowing. This is not about superstition. It's about flow, and your home has been sending signals for a while now. So today, let's walk through the 5 most common Feng Shui mistakes hidden inside your home, and how to fix them before they keep draining your energy, your money, and your peace. Before we begin, I invite you to stay until the very end of this video. The final shift might be the one your home's been waiting for. And if this speaks to you, like, subscribe, and explore the full playlist below. There's a map waiting to unlock the flow in every corner of your home. And leave a comment, let me know which shift your home needs most right now. You look at it every morning, but you never realized it was pushing your wealth out the door. You come home, the door opens, and the first thing you see is the clock. It looks innocent, clean, useful. But in Feng Shui, it sends a message that says, time is leaving, energy is moving out. Nothing stays for long here. You see, in traditional Feng Shui, the front door isn't just a door. It's the mouth of qi, where all energy enters, where wealth, luck, and support flow into your space. And when the first thing that energy meets is a ticking clock pointing straight back at the world, it doesn't settle in. It doesn't stay. It turns around. It leaves. That ticking sound, that silent countdown, becomes more than just background noise. It becomes a subconscious reminder that nothing is lasting, that time, money, and even peace are always slipping away. And the worst part? Most people never realize it. They just feel tired, behind on bills, rushing, but never arriving. It's not bad luck. It's bad placement. Over time, this setup drains more than just luck. It can create a subtle sense of restlessness, poor financial timing, or even instability in your decision-making. It's as if your life's rhythm keeps slipping just out of sync. This mistake is quiet, so the fix must be quiet too. You don't need to throw the clock away. You simply need to shift its direction and its role. Because in Feng Shui, everything is about relationship. How the clock relates to the door. How time relates to energy. How rhythm relates to flow. Start by moving the clock to the side wall of your living room or entryway. Anywhere that's not directly in line with the front door. This small shift does something powerful. It allows energy to enter freely, without being timed out the moment it arrives. Kutnyer, Kein Clock Trentung bin, Einsang am dir. And if your space is tight, you can also simply tilt the clock slightly, even just a few degrees. Enough to break the direct alignment. Energy responds to suggestion, and even a subtle angle tells the qi, you're welcome to stay. Choose a clock with rounded edges and a soft ticking or no sound at all. The energy of time should feel flowing, not counting down. Avoid sharp shapes, aggressive sounds, or digital screens that flash. They stimulate the nervous system and subtly disturb the home's emotional field. Place the clock where it supports your rhythm, where it keeps you steady, not anxious, where it aligns with your life, not rushes it. A woman wrote to me once after moving her clock. She didn't believe in Feng Shui. She had just followed a nudge. For years, her clock faced the front door, a gift from her parents, never touched. It ticked loudly, directly in line with the entry. And for years, things never seemed to land. Job interviews always close, never final. Clients pulling back. Packages lost. Money slipping out as fast as it came in. One morning, she moved it, just a few feet to the left. She didn't expect anything to happen. But that week, she had 3 clients confirm back to back. Her teenage daughter opened up after months of silence. And for the first time in a long time, her house felt still, but not stuck. Still like something had finally settled. Like time was on her side again. Sometimes, it's not about fixing your life. It's about removing what quietly misaligns it. So energy and opportunity know where to land. People often feel calmer within days. The house breathes easier. You may find yourself making better choices, arriving on time, and feeling more aligned, like your home and your life are ticking in harmony again. A clock should align with your path, not rush it out the door. But while your clock pushes energy out, something else is rotting it from the inside. Let's talk about the trash can. It's just a trash can until it sits by your front door and poisons your wealth before it even enters. It starts small, a pair of shoes by the door, then another, then 3, until your entrance becomes a pile of places you've already been, blocking the path to where you want to go. In Feng Shui, the entrance is sacred. It's where qi enters, bringing in support, money, good news, aligned people. But when that entry is cluttered with shoes scattered, stacked, unwashed, you create a physical and energetic block. It's not just mess. It's a signal to the universe. There's no space here, no clarity, no welcome. Subconsciously, it affects how you arrive home. You step into chaos, not flow, not peace. And when that pattern becomes routine, your life outside reflects the same. Delays, distractions, decisions that feel scattered. Shoes carry where you've been, but when left carelessly, they prevent where you're meant to go. At first, it's subtle. You feel off in the mornings. Visitors seem rushed. You forget things. Then it builds. Unexpected bills, delays, a general heaviness around your entrance, a home that smells clean but doesn't feel clear. And if the can is near sacred space, you may notice your rituals feel weaker, your intentions feel clouded, because qi isn't flowing with respect. It's tangled with rejection. You don't need to hide your shoes. You just need to help them rest. Start by choosing one designated area near the entrance, not directly in the energy path, but beside it. This shows the qi. Here is where the old pauses, so the new can enter. Use a low shoe rack, preferably wood or neutral tones. Low racks keep the energy grounded, stable, and easy to circulate. Tall, stacked shelves create energetic tension, especially for older family members. Place shoes neatly, all facing the same direction. Never pile them. Never stack randomly. Disorder at the door becomes disorder in the mind. Clean your shoes regularly. Wipe dust. Rotate pairs. Remove ones no longer worn. It's not just tidiness, it's energetic renewal. Dirty shoes carry old journeys, sometimes full of stress, fatigue, even grief. Keeping them in check protects your new path. You can even place a tiny bowl of rock salt beside your shoe rack to absorb lingering tension and signal a reset between the outer world and your home. One man told me he never thought his shoes had anything to do with his stress. He was a father of 3, always tired, always walking into a home that felt heavy. He blamed the kids, the job, the chaos. But when we looked closer, the front door was a bottleneck. Piles of sneakers, forgotten heels, dust, no structure, no welcome. He cleared the space, built a simple wooden rack, placed each pair like it mattered, and in just days, something shifted. He said his mornings felt smoother. He didn't snap as often. His clients started saying yes faster. "I didn't just clean the floor," he said. "I cleared the friction." Because when your path is clear, Qi doesn't hesitate, and neither do you. You'll notice it in the stillness, in how the house smells fresher, how mornings feel more open, how walking in no longer carries that weight you couldn't quite name. And your altar, if you have one, will start to feel active again, calmer, connected, like your intentions finally have a place to land. Where you place your waste is where your energy begins to rot. Choose wisely. And now, we move from the trash beneath our feet to the chaos we leave by the door. Let's talk about the shoes. Shoes carry your past, but if left in chaos, they block your future. Water is calming until it starts to stir where it shouldn't. A small fountain by the bed, a fish tank in the corner, a bowl to collect peaceful vibes, all placed with good intention. Gerong Sauhun, Chuin Sang Feng Tui. But Feng Shui teaches us this. Water is powerful. It carries energy, movement, and flow. But when placed in the wrong space, it can drown the very things we're trying to protect, especially in the bedroom, where we go to rest, recharge, and restore. Water adds motion, and motion, in a resting zone, becomes conflict. Your mind wants stillness. Your energy needs to settle, but water keeps echoing, flowing, moving, and when you place water in cluttered areas, its energy doesn't harmonize. It amplifies the chaos. Instead of flow, you create emotional flooding, anxiety, overthinking, a home that feels humid with heaviness. Water is sacred, but when misplaced, it washes away your rest, your clarity, and your wealth. The impact isn't always instant, but it builds. You feel rushed but unproductive. Things pile up. You start forgetting things. And no matter how much you try to organize your life, something always feels blocked. Clients cancel. Money comes, but doesn't stay. You clean your desk, but the energy's still stuck at the door. If your entrance is confused, your life will echo that confusion. Water carries memory. Where you place it decides what it feeds. Start by moving water away from your bedroom. This is a space for stillness, grounding, and deep replenishment. Water adds motion, and motion here brings emotional restlessness. Instead, let your bedroom breathe in quiet. Salt lamps, earthy textures, soft lighting, not streams. And if you've placed fountains or water bowls in cluttered corners, clear them. Water magnifies what surrounds it. So when the space is messy, water doesn't cleanse. It swirls the chaos deeper. Feng Shui recommends placing water elements in zones that welcome Qi, like the living room, entry foyer, or southeast corner of your home. These are places of flow, places where movement supports prosperity, not disturbs it. A small tabletop fountain, a bowl of water with fresh petals, even a clean fish tank near the entrance. These can act like magnets for abundance, gently inviting wealth to circulate. Change the water weekly. Keep it clear. Speak a whisper of intention when you refill it. Let this water carry wealth into every corner of my life, and watch what returns. Asterisk, asterisk. She thought the fountain helped her sleep. The sound was soothing, like a gentle river beside her bed. But each morning, she woke up more tired than the night before. Asterisk, asterisk. She had placed it there during a stressful time. hoping it would wash away anxiety. What it did was keep everything moving, even her mind. Her thoughts wouldn't rest. Her dreams became vivid, chaotic. Money flowed in, but somehow disappeared again. I never thought water could keep energy too alive, she said. But when I moved it to my front room, something stilled inside me. Her sleep deepened. Her emotions leveled. And most interesting, a new client called, one she hadn't heard from in months. The fountain didn't stop working. It just started working in the right place. Sometimes, water doesn't need to be removed, just redirected. So the flow you invite flows where it should. Many notice the shift in days. Mornings feel less tense. Delays reduce. It's as if the day enters smoother and leaves fewer blocks behind. Even unexpected gifts show up. A compliment, a refund, a yes that used to be a maybe. When the way is clear, wealth doesn't hesitate. Cluttered shoes, cluttered path, cluttered luck. But not all chaos is dry. Sometimes it moves. Sometimes it spills. Let's talk about water and how it drowns wealth when misplaced. You thought it made your space peaceful, but that water may be flooding your chi, that cracked bowl you never fixed, the broken chair in the corner, the old clock that hasn't ticked in years. You don't use them, but you keep them. In Feng Shui, every object in your home is alive with memory and meaning. And broken things, things that no longer work, don't just sit still. They trap energy. They freeze time. They hold you back. We often keep them because of guilt. It was a gift. I'll fix it someday. It's not that bad. But energy doesn't understand excuses. It only responds to what's alive and what's stuck. And stuck objects lead to stuck chi. You might notice projects left unfinished, opportunities delayed, money coming in but never quite circulating. Because every broken thing silently says, this is where progress ends. Asterisk, asterisk. When you keep what's broken, you keep the pattern of not quite working, and that vibration echoes through your home. Asterisk, asterisk. Water is powerful, and when misplaced, it washes away clarity, calm, and sometimes wealth itself. People often report strange symptoms: restlessness at night, financial plans falling through at the last minute, feeling like something is always off, but can't name what. It may feel emotional, but at its root, it's energetic. Water in the wrong place disturbs the chi map of your home. Instead of money settling, it slips. Instead of ideas taking root, they scatter. When energy doesn't pause, neither does peace. You don't have to throw away your memories, but you do need to release what no longer flows. Start small. Walk through your space slowly. Notice the items you haven't used in a year. The broken frame you said you'd fix. The cracked mug you haven't touched. Ask quietly, is this still serving my energy? And if it isn't, let it go. With thanks, with closure. Broken objects can be repaired and restored if they carry value, gifted or repurposed if they still bring joy, or released if they hold nothing but dust and weight. You can create a letting go ritual. Light a candle. Whisper one truth into the object. Thank you for what you were. I now release what you no longer hold. Then remove it from your home within 24 hours. Why 24 hours? Because Qi listens to timing and intention. And once it's gone, feel the air, how it shifts, how the space begins to breathe again. He didn't think it mattered. Just an old chair in the corner. It was broken, one leg slightly off, but it had history. His father's, maybe his grandfather's. He never sat on it. But every time he passed it, he noticed it. The way it leaned, the dust, the energy it seemed to hold, something frozen. One evening, without overthinking, he picked it up, whispered, "Thank you for what you've held," and let it go. Not out of disrespect, but out of recognition that this chair had done its part, and now it needed to leave. That night, he slept deeper. The corner felt brighter. And strangely, a week later, a long-stalled payment came through. He didn't connect the dots at first, but the space did. It always does. Sometimes wealth doesn't return because there's nowhere for it to sit. Letting go makes room for fortune to arrive. Water invites wealth, but only when it flows where peace lives. But sometimes, the energy doesn't move at all. It sits, forgotten, broken. Let's talk about what happens when you keep what no longer serves. It's just a cracked chair, a broken frame, a drawer that's stuck shut. But the longer you keep it, the longer you stay stuck, too. There's a drawer you haven't opened in months, a cracked cup you keep, just in case, a broken chair with too many memories. You walk past them every day, and yet you don't see them anymore. But your energy does. In Feng Shui, objects don't just sit, they vibrate. They hold memory. They loop your past. And broken things loop broken energy. We often keep them because they meant something, or because we're waiting for a better time to fix them. But while you wait, your energy waits with them. That drawer of expired electronics, that shelf with chipped statues, that cabinet full of wires that go nowhere, each one says, "This is who you used to be." And every time you walk by, part of you agrees. And so you stay in the loop, not because you want to, but because you're surrounded by things that have already stopped moving. When stuck objects fill your space, stuck patterns fill your life, you hesitate, procrastinate. You cling to routines that don't serve, just like that drawer you never open. People report financial blocks, delayed projects, exhaustion that can't be explained. And most don't realize it's because they're surrounded by mirrors of things that no longer move. What you hold onto physically, you recreate energetically. Letting go isn't wasteful. It's an act of trust. A way to tell your home, "I'm ready for what's next." Start small. One shelf, one corner, one drawer. Don't force yourself to throw everything out. Just ask, does this still support who I'm becoming? If it doesn't, that's the moment of choice. You don't need anger. You don't need guilt. You just need intention. Place your hand gently on the object. Whisper one truth. "I thank you, and I release what no longer flows with me." Then, if it can be fixed, fix it now, not someday. If it still works but no longer fits, donate. If it's broken beyond use, release with grace. For emotionally heavy items, write a note. One line. "Thank you for your time in my life." Burn it safely, then let the object go. When we clear things with respect, we tell the chi, "I don't fear the empty space. I welcome what's next." This is how you shift your environment from memory to momentum. Not by changing everything, but by removing what keeps you from changing. Asterisk. Asterisk. He wasn't a messy person, just sentimental. He had a drawer full of old phones, chargers for devices long gone, a cracked mug he once drank tea from every morning. Asterisk. Asterisk. He said he never thought much of it, until one day, after yet another deal fell through, he sat down and just stared at that drawer, and something hit him. This drawer is my life, full of things that used to work. That night, he cleared it out, one piece at a time. thanked each item, some aloud, some silently, burned a tiny note for one, "I release you." By morning, the drawer was empty, but he didn't feel the loss. He felt a shift. 2 days later, a client who'd ghosted him for months suddenly replied. A new project came in. He didn't even link it to the drawer, but the drawer knew. Sometimes, letting go of one forgotten thing reminds the universe that you remember your worth. Energy doesn't ask for perfection, but it does ask for space. When something breaks, listen. Sometimes, it's a sign you're meant to release. We've moved the clock, hidden the trash, cleared the shoes, redirected the water, and released what no longer holds life. Now, let's gather all of it and unlock the new energy waiting to rise. Now that the flow has been cleared, let's lock it in. Let's turn awareness into alignment, because energy doesn't shift by accident. It shifts when you move with intention. Here's how to reset your home's chi in just one quiet day. Move the clock so time no longer rushes energy out your front door. Tuck away the trash so wealth isn't greeted with waste. Clear the shoes so chi doesn't stumble at the threshold. Relocate the water to spaces that invite movement, not emotional overflow. Release the broken so your space no longer echoes what no longer works. It's not about having the perfect home. It's about living in a space where everything flows with purpose, with clarity, with intention. Asterisk, asterisk. You didn't need to change everything. Just 5 things. 5 choices that whispered to your home, "I'm ready to receive." Asterisk, asterisk. Because when you move the clock, you move time back to your rhythm. When you hide the trash, you protect the sacredness of your flow. When you clear the shoes, you open the door to new paths. When you relocate the water, you let emotions soften instead of spill. And when you release the broken, you tell the universe, "I no longer live in what's not working." Thank you for walking through this energy with me. If something shifted for you today, even just a breath, leave a comment. Let me know which object spoke to your chi. Subscribe if you feel this space is right for you. And explore the full playlist below, where more whispers are waiting. Until next time, may your space speak clearly, and may your energy always flow home.